She danced in a skirt made of bananas, she laughed, she sparkled, she twirled, and all of Paris fell at her feet. But no one knew that behind the mask of a star hid a spy, a woman who risked her life to save Europe from the Nazis. She was the first black superstar of the 20th century, a singer, an actress, and at the same time a secret agent who passed coded messages hidden right inside the notes of her songs. Her name was Josephine Baker, and her story is the story of how one woman turned the stage into a weapon and art into an act of resistance. From a poor girl in the slums of America to a legend buried with military honors in France. Her life was a movie that truly happened. And if you think you know what courage is, listen to what this woman did. She was born in 1906 in the rough streets of St. Louis, Missouri, a world where poverty, violence, and racial hatred were part of daily life. Her name was Frida Josephine McDonald, but no one back then imagined that this fragile little girl would one day become Josephine Baker, the most famous woman in Paris and one of the most daring heroes of the Second World War. Her childhood was far from glamorous. Her mother worked as a washerwoman, her father disappeared before she could even remember his face, and her stepfather treated her cruelly. The little Josephine grew up surrounded by hunger and fear, wearing clothes that barely held together, watching her mother struggle for every piece of bread. She dreamed of another life, a life filled with music, laughter, and freedom. But at that time, it seemed completely unreachable. When she was only 13 years old, she ran away from home, barefoot, terrified, yet determined never to return. She joined a group of street performers, sleeping under bridges, dancing for coins, doing anything to survive. People who saw her back then said she had something magnetic, something wild in her eyes, like she knew she was born for something greater. She joined small vaudeville troupes, performing in cheap theaters, where the air smelled of sweat and cheap perfume, and the audience laughed not at her jokes, but at her skin color. America at that time was a country divided by segregation, where a black girl could dance her heart out and still be refused a meal in a restaurant. Josephine learned to turn pain into performance. When the crowd mocked her, she smiled even brighter. When they booed, she danced faster, wilder, freer. Her body became her weapon, her expression of defiance, her silent scream against injustice. By the time she was 15, she had already toured across the country with different dance troupes, learning rhythm, comedy, timing, and most importantly, resilience. She had a gift for transformation. Every stage became her escape, every spotlight a promise that life could be different. She was still poor, still treated like she did not belong, but something inside her refused to break. In her late teens, she was noticed by a producer who offered her a ticket to Paris, a city hungry for something new, something exotic, something bold. She did not speak French. She had no money, no family, nothing but her talent and her courage. But Josephine knew, with the certainty of someone who had already faced the worst, that she had nothing to lose. She boarded the ship to France, not knowing that this journey would change her life forever. The little girl from St. Louis, who once danced for pennies on street corners, was sailing toward destiny. She was about to conquer the world, and she did it with a smile that could silence every doubt, with a spirit that refused to bow, and with a fire that would soon make her name echo through history. When Josephine arrived in Paris in 1925, the city was electric. The war was over, people were hungry for joy, and the nightlife pulsed with energy, jazz, and scandal. For a young woman who had survived hunger and humiliation in America, Paris felt like another planet. Here, no one cared about the color of her skin. Here, she was not invisible. Her debut took place at the Théâtre des Champs-Élysées in a show called La Revue Nègre. And when she stepped on stage wearing almost nothing but a skirt made of fake bananas, the audience gasped. They had never seen anything like her. She danced with wildness, humor, and freedom that broke every rule of polite society. The crowd exploded. Overnight, Josephine Baker became the symbol of the Roaring Twenties, the new face of modern Paris, and the talk of every salon in Europe. She was called the Black Venus, the Creole Goddess, the Queen of Jazz. Painters painted her, poets wrote about her, designers begged to dress her. Picasso said she was the most sensational woman he had ever seen. Ernest Hemingway called her the most wonderful woman who ever lived. But behind all the glitter, Josephine was still that girl from St. Louis who had fought for every step. She knew fame could vanish as quickly as it appeared, so she worked harder than anyone else. She rehearsed for hours, learned French, studied music, and turned herself into not just a dancer, but a performer, a phenomenon. She blended comedy, rhythm, and elegance in a way no one had done before. When she smiled, the whole theater melted. When she danced, the orchestra seemed to follow her heartbeat. And yet, even in her most provocative moments, there was something pure, something joyful about her. She did not dance for shock, she danced for freedom. Her image became a revolution. In a Europe still fascinated by exoticism and colonial fantasies, Josephine took control of the gaze that had once humiliated her. She turned it into power. Her performances made people question their ideas about race, beauty, and identity. She was both fantasy and rebellion, both entertainment and statement. Paris adored her. Men sent her flowers and diamonds. Women copied her hairstyles and her clothes. Her face appeared on posters, chocolates, and perfume bottles. But for Josephine, the applause meant more than fame. It meant she had finally found a place where she was not judged by her color, but celebrated for her talent. Standing under the bright lights of Paris, she realized that art could do what politics never could. It could unite people through emotion, laughter, and rhythm. The girl who once danced barefoot on American streets was now the heartbeat of Europe. She had turned her survival into spectacle, her pain into power, her body into poetry. And though the audience only saw the shining surface, deep inside, Josephine Baker knew this was just the beginning. Fame surrounded Josephine like a golden cage, bright and dazzling, but still a cage. By the early 1930s, she was one of the most famous women on the planet. Her name lit up theaters from Paris to Berlin, from Vienna to Buenos Aires. She lived in luxury, wore sparkling gowns, and performed for kings and queens. Yet behind that radiant smile, she carried a deep ache, a wound that fame could not heal. Because no matter how adored she was in Europe, she had never truly been accepted in her own homeland, America. When she decided to return there on tour, she expected applause, love, and respect. Instead, she met the same cruel reality she had escaped years earlier. In city after city, hotels refused to let her stay because of the color of her skin. Restaurants denied her service. Some theaters demanded that black audiences sit separately from whites, even when they came to see her perform. Imagine that. A global superstar, worshipped in Paris, treated like a second-class citizen in the country of her birth. Josephine hid her pain behind her usual poise, but inside, she was furious. She could not understand how a nation that claimed to believe in freedom could be so blind to its own cruelty. She refused to perform in segregated venues. She told club owners that if everyone could not sit together, she would not go on stage. Her stand was brave, radical, and costly. Some contracts were canceled. Some newspapers called her difficult. But Josephine did not back down. She had lived through too much to let anyone silence her again. During one infamous incident in New York, she was denied service at the Stork Club, one of the most elite spots in the city. When she protested, the American press turned against her, twisting the story, painting her as arrogant and ungrateful. It was a public humiliation that hurt deeply, but it also clarified her mission. That night she made a silent promise to herself. If the world would not give her justice, she would create her own version of it. The experience hardened her, sharpened her, transformed her. The glamour that once defined her began to take on a new meaning. Her fame was no longer about applause or admiration. It became a weapon, a platform. She started using her voice not only to sing, but to speak, to challenge, to inspire. Josephine began supporting civil rights causes, donating to organizations that fought against racial discrimination, and using her status to draw attention to injustice. Deep inside, she was preparing for something even greater. Because soon, the world would fall into war, and Josephine Baker, the entertainer, the icon, the woman who once danced to survive, would become something no one expected. A spy, a soldier of freedom, and one of the bravest women of her generation. When the war came, Josephine Baker did not hesitate. France, the country that had given her freedom, was now under threat. and she was determined to fight for it. By the year 1939, when Germany invaded Poland and the world began to crumble, Josephine transformed once again. The glittering performer, the star of Parisian nights, became a woman with a mission. She volunteered for the French resistance, not as a symbol, not as decoration, but as a real operative willing to risk her life. Her fame became her perfect disguise. Who would suspect that the most glamorous woman in Europe, the darling of the stage, was secretly working as a spy? Her charm opened every door. Her presence disarmed suspicion. At embassy parties, military receptions, and lavish dinners, she listened, observed, remembered. She collected fragments of conversations, bits of strategy, whispers about troop movements. While others toasted champagne, she memorized secrets that could save lives. She was officially recruited by the Deuxième Bureau, the French military intelligence service, as an honorary correspondent, but her work went far beyond honorary. She used her celebrity status to travel freely across borders, often under the pretense of performing for diplomats and soldiers. Her entourage included other agents who helped her pass information to the resistance. To the outside world, she remained the joyful Josephine, the woman who brought laughter to a Europe drowning in fear. But behind that laughter was steel. When the Nazis marched into Paris in 1940, she fled to her home in the south of France, Château de Milande, where she began hiding weapons and refugees. Her estate became both a sanctuary and a secret base of operations. German officers visited her home, believing her to be harmless, a frivolous entertainer. But Josephine knew how to play her part. She smiled, she sang, she distracted them, and all the while she continued gathering intelligence. Her connections allowed her to move through occupied and unoccupied zones, carrying vital messages for the Free French forces. Her courage was astonishing. One mistake, one wrong move, one suspicious glance could have meant imprisonment or death. Yet she carried herself with elegance and composure, using the same grace that had once captivated audiences to outwit her enemies. People around her often said she seemed fearless, but it was not that she lacked fear. She simply refused to let it control her. Josephine once said that she owed her life to France, and now it was her turn to repay that debt. Every journey, every performance, every smile became part of her double life. The stage lights that had once illuminated her fame now masked her most dangerous secret. The world still saw a star, but in truth, Josephine Baker had become a soldier, a spy, and a weapon against tyranny. Her genius as a spy was in her creativity. Josephine Baker turned art into camouflage, music into a weapon, and charm into strategy. While other agents hid behind false identities, she hid in plain sight, performing under the spotlight while carrying state secrets that could shift the course of war. Her greatest invention was using her sheet music as a code book. Messages written in invisible ink were hidden among musical notes, seemingly ordinary, yet filled with military intelligence about troop locations, supply routes, and enemy strategies. To any observer, they looked like harmless love songs, but in truth, they were secret reports meant for Allied officers. She carried these coded pages in her luggage, sometimes sewn into her costumes or tucked between layers of paper. When border guards inspected her belongings, they found nothing suspicious, only the possessions of a famous performer. They would even ask for autographs, completely unaware that they were letting top-secret documents slip through their hands. Josephine used every bit of her theatrical intuition to play her part. She knew when to act innocent, when to flirt, when to laugh, when to distract. She understood that in war, performance could be as powerful as any gun. Once, during a diplomatic trip to Portugal, she smuggled crucial information written in invisible ink directly on her musical scores, which she later handed to French intelligence officers in Lisbon. Another time, she used postcards, love letters, and even song lyrics to pass along encoded messages. She had a photographic memory, allowing her to recall long lists of details without writing them down. That ability made her invaluable, especially when physical notes were too risky. Josephine traveled through Spain, Portugal, Morocco, and North Africa, often carrying sensitive materials hidden inside her luggage or even pinned inside her underwear. Her fame provided the perfect cover. No one dared to strip search an international celebrity adored by half of Europe. She would smile, pose for photographs, and behind that radiant grin, she carried information that could save countless lives. Her methods were bold but never reckless. She planned every move with precision, and she always kept her cool. Even under interrogation, she knew how to control the scene, to stay in character, to protect her secrets. Fellow agents later said she had an unshakable presence, a kind of magic that made everyone around her believe exactly what she wanted them to believe. Her life had always been theater, and now that talent became her most dangerous weapon. What made her even more extraordinary was her sense of purpose. Josephine was not doing this for glory or reward. She truly believed that freedom had to be defended, that art and courage could walk hand in hand. In a world torn apart by hatred and war, she turned her voice, her beauty, and her intelligence into instruments of resistance. The same hands that once held microphones now held coded messages. The same woman who once danced to entertain the world now danced to protect it. Her bravery had no limits. Josephine Baker did not just carry secrets in her music sheets, she carried them across borders, through danger, through fear. She became a messenger of freedom in the truest sense. Her missions often required her to travel from France to Spain, then to Portugal, then across the Mediterranean to Morocco, and finally to French territories in North Africa. Each trip meant passing through checkpoints guarded by soldiers who could have arrested her, tortured her, even killed her. But Josephine knew exactly how to play her role. She would arrive dressed in elegance, laughing, dazzling, acting like the carefree star the world adored. No one ever imagined that beneath her silk dresses, hidden in her luggage or stitched into her underwear, she was carrying maps, coded notes, and military reports. Her charm disarmed everyone. When officers inspected her bags, she distracted them with conversation, flattery, or even a spontaneous performance. She understood that the best disguise was the one everyone wanted to believe. During one mission, her plane was forced to land unexpectedly in Casablanca. The authorities questioned her for hours and everyone around her panicked. But Josephine never lost her calm. She joked, she smiled, she pretended to be an innocent artist confused by the chaos of war. By the end of the interrogation, the officers apologized to her and even carried her luggage to her car, completely unaware that inside those suitcases were documents critical to Allied intelligence. Her courage was extraordinary, but it was not without cost. The stress, the constant travel, the fear of discovery took a toll on her health. She fell ill with pneumonia in Morocco, so severe that doctors told her she might not survive. Yet even while recovering, she continued to send messages and shelter refugees. When the German occupation spread, she used her celebrity status to obtain travel permits for others, smuggling Jews and resistance fighters out of danger. To those she helped, she was not the glamorous Josephine Baker of the stage. She was a guardian angel. Her loyalty to France was absolute. She once said that France had made her feel human for the first time, and that she would give her life to defend it. And she meant it. There were moments when she could have escaped, left the war behind, hidden in luxury somewhere safe. But that was not her nature. She chose danger over comfort, duty over fame. In every performance she gave for the Allied troops, she brought not only music, but hope. Soldiers would later say that when Josephine sang, they forgot the war, if only for a moment. But behind the songs there was a deeper message, that courage has many faces, and sometimes the bravest soldier wears sequins and a smile. Josephine Baker proved that strength could be graceful, that resistance could be elegant, and that even in the darkest times, light can come from the unlikeliest places. When the war finally ended, Josephine Baker was no longer just an entertainer, she was a hero. The world had changed, and so had she. The woman who once danced for applause had now risked her life for freedom, and France knew it. Her work for the resistance was revealed, and people were astonished. They learned that the smiling star who had brought laughter to war-torn Europe had also been a secret weapon against the Nazis. Josephine received the Croix de Guerre, the Medal of the Resistance, and was named a Chevalier of the Legion of Honor by General Charles de Gaulle himself. Few women, and even fewer entertainers, had ever been given such recognition. Yet Josephine accepted these medals not with pride, but with humility. She said she had simply done what any grateful person would do for the country that had given her dignity and respect. France had embraced her when America had turned its back, and she never forgot it. After the war, she returned to performing, but her shows now had a different spirit. They were not just about glamour or spectacle anymore. They were celebrations of survival, of unity, of hope. She performed for soldiers, for children, for people rebuilding their lives from ruins. Her songs carried a quiet strength, a message that love and courage could outlast destruction. She traveled the world again, performing for audiences who saw her not only as a star but as a living legend. When she walked on stage, she carried the weight of history with her. Kings, presidents, and ordinary citizens all came to see her, not just to be entertained, but to feel inspired. Yet, Josephine never used her fame for vanity. She used it as a platform to speak about peace, equality, and humanity. She often said that war had taught her one simple truth, that hatred destroys, but kindness heals. Her home, the Château de Milande, became a gathering place for veterans and orphans, a symbol of the world she wanted to build, where no one would be judged by their race, religion, or origin. In official ceremonies, she appeared in her military uniform, standing proudly among generals, her chest shining with medals. But her smile was always gentle, never arrogant. People said that when she saluted, she did it not as a performer, but as a soldier who had earned her place through courage and sacrifice. France saw her as one of its own, a woman who had given her art, her heart, and her life to defend liberty. Josephine Baker, once the barefoot girl from St. Louis, had become a national hero of France, proof that even a dancer can change the course of history when her soul burns for freedom. After the war, Josephine Baker could have lived a life of luxury, surrounded by fame and admiration, but she chose a different path, one guided by love and idealism. She had seen the world torn apart by hatred and prejudice, and she decided that her mission in peace would be just as meaningful as her mission in war. She dreamed of creating a living example of unity, a place that would show humanity what harmony truly looked like. From that dream came her extraordinary project, which she called the Rainbow Tribe. Josephine began adopting children from all over the world, from every race, culture, and religion. She adopted 2 boys from Japan, 2 from Algeria, 1 from Finland, 1 from Venezuela, 1 from France, 1 from Israel, 1 from the Ivory Coast, 1 from Morocco, and others from Colombia and Korea, 12 in total. She raised them all together in her estate, the Château de Milande, in the French countryside. She wanted the world to see that people of different colors and backgrounds could live together as brothers and sisters, without hate, without fear. To Josephine, her family was not a publicity act, it was a living statement. She called it her experiment in brotherhood. Visitors from around the world came to see this unusual family, and Josephine proudly guided them around the property, introducing each child and explaining their origins. There were small flags from each child's homeland, flying in the garden, and she made sure that every culture was celebrated. The children grew up learning different languages, wearing traditional clothes from their birth countries, eating dishes from many nations. Josephine wanted them to understand that diversity was not a weakness, but a treasure. She even opened the chateau to tourists, using the income to support her family and to spread her message of tolerance. It was part zoo, part museum, part dream of a better future. But behind the smiles, her life was not easy. Maintaining such a large household was expensive, and she often faced financial difficulties. Still, she refused to give up her vision. She would sell jewelry, perform around the world, even borrow money just to keep the home running. To her, these children were not symbols. They were her heart. She loved them fiercely, taught them kindness, and believed that they would one day carry her dream forward. The Rainbow Tribe was more than a family. It was her personal war against racism. Each child was proof that love could erase prejudice, that the walls dividing humanity were illusions built by fear. When people criticized her, saying she was naive, Josephine only smiled. She had seen enough of the world to know that real change starts with small acts, with one home, one family, one heart at a time. In the middle of the quiet French countryside, she built a miniature version of the world she wanted to see, colorful, peaceful, and united. As the years passed, Josephine Baker's fame continued to shine, but her mission grew even greater. In the 1950s and 60s, while much of the world still struggled with racism and segregation, she decided to return to the United States, the country that had once rejected her, to fight for justice. This time, she would not come as an entertainer seeking applause. She would come as a woman determined to demand equality. America had changed, but not enough. Black citizens were still denied basic rights, still forced to live under the shadow of discrimination. Josephine saw it with her own eyes and refused to stay silent. Using her international fame, she became a powerful voice in the civil rights movement. When most celebrities avoided politics, she stood on the front lines. She refused to perform in any venue that practiced segregation, forcing clubs and hotels to change their policies if they wanted her to appear. Bit by bit, she broke down barriers that had stood for generations. In 1963, she appeared at the March on Washington, standing side by side with Martin Luther King Jr. in front of hundreds of thousands of people. Dressed in her Free French military uniform, her chest covered in medals, she spoke to the crowd with the authority of someone who had fought both fascism and racism. She told them that she had seen hatred in many forms and that love, courage, and dignity were the only true weapons against it. Her words moved the audience deeply. Many who were there said that when Josephine Baker took the stage, she embodied history itself, a woman who had faced every kind of oppression and still stood unbroken. After Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated, his widow Coretta Scott King asked Josephine to take his place as the leader of the civil rights movement. It was one of the highest honors imaginable, but Josephine declined. She said that her children needed her, that she could not risk leaving them without a mother. Still, she never stopped speaking out, never stopped fighting for what she believed in. She participated in rallies, charity events, and humanitarian missions, often reminding people that the battle for justice was far from over. Through it all, Josephine carried herself with the same grace that had defined her entire life. She never used anger as her weapon. She used compassion, humor, and dignity. She proved that strength does not have to shout, that real power often comes from patience and love. The little girl who had once been denied a seat in a restaurant was now dining with world leaders and using her voice to speak for the voiceless. Josephine Baker had transformed her fame into a force for good, her art into activism, and her legacy into a promise that one person's courage can inspire a world to change. In the spring of 1975, Paris once again lit up with the name Josephine Baker. After years away from the spotlight, she returned to the stage for a grand comeback show celebrating 50 years of her career. The performance was breathtaking, a dazzling mix of her old routines, military pride, and pure emotion. The audience was filled with stars, politicians, and royalty. Princess Grace of Monaco, her longtime friend, helped organize the event. Josephine, now almost 70 years old, moved with the same radiant energy she had carried all her life. Her smile had not dimmed, her presence still commanded every eye. For her, it was more than a concert. It was a final declaration of victory, a living testament that art, courage, and love had conquered every hardship she had ever faced. The reviews were extraordinary. Critics called it the triumph of the century, saying that Josephine Baker had returned not just as a performer, but as a legend reborn. But only 4 days after the premiere, tragedy struck. On the 12th of April, 1975, Josephine was found unconscious in her bed, surrounded by the newspapers that praised her show. She had suffered a cerebral hemorrhage. She was rushed to the hospital, but it was too late. At 68 years old, Josephine Baker, the woman who had danced through poverty, war, and history, was gone. The news broke hearts around the world. France mourned her as one of its own. Thousands gathered to say goodbye. Her funeral was unlike any other. She became the first Black woman and the first American-born woman to receive full military honors from the French Republic. Soldiers marched with her coffin draped in the French flag as trumpets played the Marseillaise. Her medals glistened in the sunlight, symbols of a life lived for freedom and humanity. People threw flowers, cried, and applauded as the procession passed because even in death, Josephine Baker inspired celebration, not sorrow. Her body was laid to rest in Monaco, near the family that had loved her, but her spirit never left France. Decades later, in the year 2021, her legacy reached new heights when she was inducted into the Pantheon in Paris, the sacred resting place of France's greatest heroes. Her name now stands beside those of Victor Hugo, Marie Curie, and Voltaire. The little girl who once danced barefoot in the streets of St. Louis became a symbol of courage, beauty, and unity for the entire world. Her story remains one of the most extraordinary journeys in history, from rags to royalty, from stage to battlefield, from rejection to immortality. Josephine Baker proved that a single